there, and welcome to, I think it's episode 6. Maybe, yeah, I'm pretty sure it's episode 6. Regardless, welcome to the Star Wars Podcast Racer. I'm Tyler, and I do not have a guest today. This is actually my second time recording this, because I just felt like the first time was bad. Hopefully this time's better. At this point, maybe I'll just release it even if it is bad. I don't know. So, no guests today. Like I said, just me. Let's talk about something kind of serious in a way. We're going to talk about art and George Lucas. So, what is art? Well, give me a second here. If I Google art, AI overview says, art is a vast field of creative human expression, encompassing activities like painting, music, literature, dance, and film, intended to evoke emotion, beauty, or ideas through various mediums, often categorized in traditional 7 arts: painting, sculpture, architecture, music, literature, theater, film, and modern forms like photography. Hey, why aren't you including video games there? Come on, video games are art. I don't care what you say. It's a storytelling art. It doesn't matter if it's relatively new. Anyways, I'm getting off topic here. My point with that is that I'm incredibly lazy to the point where I had to Google it during recording this. Like, I could have looked it up and then hit record. I am so lazy when it comes to this podcast. But the more important thing is that I wanted to just kind of explain that, yes, film is art. And the people who make the film are artists in their own way. However, when it comes to certain types of movies, they're not really considered art in the way that something like an artist painting something would be. And that usually comes to blockbuster films. So most people will watch a Marvel Cinematic Universe movie, and they're not going to be like, wow, this is real art. They're going to be like, oh, this is fun. And I'm not saying that's necessarily right or wrong. I think that's kind of above my pay grade. But I will say that I do sort of understand. Generally speaking, if something if somebody's making a graphic designer is making something for McDonald's, let's say, because of all the corporate BS that's going into it, it's kind of it's not that it's not art, it's just that it's not art, if that makes sense. There's so much being put into it to try to appeal to everybody, that you kind of lose something there. The art, it's not a pure thing from the artist. And there is something with that when it comes to blockbusters, because generally speaking, those are all corporate films. Disney owns Marvel, so they're very heavily okay, you're doing this MCU movie, okay, well, you gotta make sure that it includes these sponsor things that are in it. Don't feature this. Also, we got these movies coming up, so you gotta reference this, but you're not allowed to reference that. Also, we personally are trying to get into this market, so don't include any of these, and do include these. There is just so many corporate type notes and stuff that goes into most big blockbusters that, yeah, it kind of loses a lot of its potency as art. Now, of course, debates could be had, but again, above my pay grade. What I do want to get into, though, is kind of how some people will treat that. So, because these blockbusters are essentially designed to appeal to everybody, that's kind of how people will approach them. So, if there's an MCU movie, for example, The Eternals. I watched The Eternals in theaters, and I didn't like it, really. I didn't hate it. I didn't really like it. I just kind of like, who's this for? Like, it just didn't feel like it was for me. I didn't know who it was for. It didn't really feel like a fun movie. Like, I don't know. Like, I think maybe the director was going for something a little bit more artsy, and because the Eternals wasn't whatever, Disney kind of allowed them to be a little bit more loose, and it kind of led to a situation where a lot of people were just like giving it bad reviews because it wasn't for them. And I'm not here to say if that's a good or bad thing in general, like when it comes to these kind of blockbusters. I just think that it is kind of an interesting thing where we kind of will approach movies differently based on based on whether or not they're blockbusters, basically. Now, all that being said, what does that have to do with Star Wars? Star Wars is a blockbuster. Yes. However, at least the first 6 Star Wars movies, the original 6 episodes, were not owned by a major corporation. Disney did not own them. Fox did not own them. They were owned by Lucasfilm, which I don't even think was a public company. George Lucas was the one in charge. George Lucas was the one that owned Star Wars. Star Wars was his creative vision 100%. And yet, people would, treat each of, for mostly the prequels, we're mostly talking about the prequels here, would approach each of them in a very, in a way, entitled way. And I don't mean that in I don't necessarily mean that in a, oh, well, if you didn't like them, you're entitled. No. I don't mean it like that. But what I mean is that people would approach them like, these movies are supposed to appeal to me. If they don't appeal to me personally, there's something wrong with them. That's a very common thing with blockbusters. And Star Wars is interesting because, again, the first 6 movies were undoubtedly blockbusters, but they weren't corporate created blockbusters. They were, in a sense, true storytelling art that completely surpassed everything and made it into the mass public release model, which is very unusual when it comes to those kind of artistic endeavors. But yeah, in a way, Star Wars was like that. Now, okay, let's go back to the original. Okay, the original Star Wars was intended to be a throwback to the 1930s sci-fi serials. There wasn't a lot. George Lucas really wasn't okay. I want to make it clear. It's not that he wasn't putting a lot into it. No, he was, and he did want it to say some stuff. This was in the middle of the Vietnam War, and yes, Star Wars was actually a bit of a Vietnam movie here. There was things he wanted to be said, but first and foremost, he wanted it to be a fun throwback, a fun nostalgic throwback to those serials. So that's what it was. However, because of how hugely successful it was, and the fact that he still owned, completely owned the rights to everything that he created with Star Wars, and the rights to sequels and everything, he then was able to when working on the sequels, expand his scope. So he was able to be well, okay, wait, what if I make this more than just these adventure serials or whatever? Because here's the other thing, he didn't want to make the exact same movie again. He didn't. He made Star Wars, what we now know as Star Wars: A New Hope, but he made Star Wars, and he didn't want to make another Star Wars. He wanted to tell a new story, or continue that story, but while telling another one, do new things, have new characters at times. Even if it's in the same world, he didn't want it to do the exact same thing. And that's true of all of his Star Wars movies. Now, the only sort of exception is the fact that, yes, there was a second Death Star in Return of the Jedi. But that was very different. Like, okay, the actual idea of, oh, here's a Death Star we gotta blow up, yes, on paper, that is very similar. But the story isn't about our hero going in and blowing up the Death Star. No, our hero is on the Death Star trying to save the soul of his lost father. Meanwhile, our other heroes are on the planet's surface trying to like destroy the shield generator so that some of the other people can go in and blow it up. Like we're dealing with a lot of different aspects of it. It's just kind of a holdover of the fact that he was bringing back some of his old original The Star Wars rough draft elements where, okay, yeah, now we have a second Death Star. I don't know. I'm okay with it. I love both Death Stars. I feel like they're different enough where it's okay. But I did want to acknowledge that, yeah, there was that aspect that is similar, but even then I feel like it's different enough where, like, the movie isn't the same, you know? Like, Episode 6, Return of the Jedi, is not a retread of A New Hope. Arguably, the Death Star is, like, the climax... Well, again, I wouldn't even say the climax is. Only one aspect of the climax sort of is. But even then, it's different, because there isn't, like, a trench. It's not like, oh, we gotta go through the trench and hopefully do whatever. No, it's, we gotta wait for the shield to go down, then they can just fly right into it because the thing is not finished, like, it's not finished being built. They can go and blow it up from the inside. I'm getting off topic kind of here, sorry. It just, my point is, every Star Wars movie up to this point, up to like through 1 through 6, are significantly different. They are not retreads. He wasn't trying to just redo the exact same movie that was popular and just make more money off of it. Now, a good way of, like, for example, Jaws, hugely successful movie. Jaws 2, a sequel that was essentially just Jaws again. And then Jaws 3, sequel that's just Jaws again, but now it's in SeaWorld. Jaws 4. You get the point. Like, Jaws was this massive blockbuster success, and it was owned by Universal. So Universal wanted to do more sequels, and because it's a blockbuster where they're trying to be like, okay, we're trying to make as much money as much money as possible, so we have to appease as many people as possible. We're going to make the exact same movie again. Because that's the thing. If they liked the movie, they want more of it. That means they want to see the exact same movie again. So that's what they often did. That's what a lot of big blockbusters kind of do to some extent. Star Wars didn't. Empire Strikes Back, very, very, very different. Again, Return of the Jedi, there are some slight similarities, again, with the Death Star thing, but, like, that's almost like, it's almost like you're returning to a location as opposed to, like, the exact same sequence of events. I don't know, I feel like it's different enough. But then you get to the prequels, and yeah, they're all very different. This is not a series of, like, oh, let's just kind of retell these same movies. This is a series where George Lucas has a very specific vision. A story he wanted to tell about a young boy who grows up, gives into his fear, turns to darkness, but the love of his son was able to save him from that darkness. It's, I think, a beautiful story. And that is what George Lucas ultimately wanted to tell. Yeah, no, he didn't want to tell it right away. Of course, that was not in his head when he made A New Hope. No. However, broad strokes at the very least, that was in his head when he was making Empire Strikes Back. Now, Speaking of Empire Strikes Back, we do have to talk about the other elephant in the room when it comes to art being made, or movies being made as art. And that is the fact that, unlike a lot of other mediums, there isn't any one person necessarily. Like it's a collaborative effort. Empire Strikes Back and Return of the Jedi specifically had other directors. George Lucas was ultimately in charge, of course, but the day-to-day directing he left to other people, mostly because he almost died making the original Star Wars. And in fact, that's also how he wanted it for the prequel trilogy. It's just that nobody would agree to direct it. Nobody he trusted would agree to direct it. Not out of any malice, but actually because they're like, listen, this will not appease. Like, they're at this point, this movie is so, like, there's so much fan expectation on the prequel trilogy. There's no way that it's going to live up to the hype. So we'd rather not get ourselves into this crap. And that's why George Lucas directed the prequel trilogy. But my point is that yes, film is collaborative. However, there is still a singular voice usually. Like, yes, everybody that, like, even down to the cameraman is going to be, like, doing things slightly different than somebody else might. Because they're not tools, they're people. And even if they're following directions, there's a good chance there's going to be a little bit of their own, slightly. Like, you know, like, that is something that is true. Not to mention, of course, the actors. Every actor is going to be a little, even following directions, every actor will be different. And that's true. However, it's not fair to say that, like, George Lucas only came up with an idea and then... Okay, I now have to talk about this, actually, before I get into anything else here. So, a lot of people, including people that I think are generally smart and I respect, seem to fall into this very false narrative that George Lucas didn't do anything when he made the original movie. It's so weird. Okay. Yes. Again, film is largely collaborative. And yes, George ultimately did hire 3 incredibly talented editors to help edit his movie. However, for whatever reason, there's this weird false narrative that a lot of people subscribe to and believe that the movie was absolute crap. George had no idea what he was doing. And these 3 editors were brought in almost against George's will sometimes, depending on who's telling this story. And these 3 editors are the only reason that Star Wars ended up being even somewhat watchable. And that's an absolute downright lie. Mostly because George is the one that hired these editors. It is true that, yes, at the very beginning, like the very beginning of post-production, things were not going well. And that's because there was an editor that was hired that was very bad at his... Okay, not very bad at this job. I don't want to be totally rude. Was not right for this job. He would not listen to George. He didn't respect George. George had a very specific vision as to how these movies were going to be edited, which was not the norm. And so this guy was editing it against George's will, in a way that was against George's will, so George fired him. And now I know you might be thinking, well, why did it get that bad? And that's kind of because of the other thing. George's producer in the first 2 movies was very bad at his job. the producer is supposed to be able to prevent things like that from happening. The producer is meant to be like a when I say producer, I don't like there's different kinds of producers. I mean very specifically like the kind of producer that's like working with the director, right? This producer is supposed to like the producer is supposed to help make or help the movie be run smoothly according to the director's will, according to the director's wishes. And this producer was not good at that. This producer didn't like confrontation, and so was just kind of like, just let him do his job. You know, is it really that big a deal, George? And George did not like it. In fact, George did not want to hire him back for Empire, but was kind of guilted into it. And that went so horribly, according to basically everybody except for the producer. And, like, this isn't just George is saying all this stuff. This is everybody around George. Everybody that, even some people who don't like George, would flat out say this. The producer was so bad that, yeah, he was not brought back. Now, here's the thing. Because a lot of people consider Return of the Jedi to be kind of like the start of, like, quote-unquote, bad Star Wars. I'll get into that. That's a whole other thing, but I'll get into that. Because of that, a lot of people think that this producer was also, like, one of the only ones that knew what he was doing. And, like, if you research it, even, like, a little bit, it's so obviously wrong and not true. And yet, that is a lie that just keeps getting repeated. The same, again, with the editors. Now, the difference is, the editors that were brought on were very good at their job. They did phenomenal work. But part of the reason they were able to do phenomenal work is because they listened to what George Lucas wanted. George Lucas loved editing. He was heavily involved in the post-production. In fact, with the original Star Wars, there is proof that he actually edited a lot of it himself initially. Like once that guy was fired, he actually went in and started editing some of it himself. He left like the final edits to the editing team, and he didn't even try to be like, I deserve to be, and listen. No, he's like, look, I'm not one of the editors. Like, yeah, I'm the director and the writer, all that, but these three are the editors of the movie. But they're the editors that were working with George and working with George's wishes. And again, there is proof that, like, for example, one of the editors is was George Lucas's wife, Marsha Lucas. She's a very talented editor. She actually didn't edit all that much in Star Wars, but what she did edit was important. Like the mostly she just edited the trench run scene, and the trench run scene is incredibly important, and it is incredibly well done. To the point where, even like with the special edition where, a lot of like the effects were redone and everything, George made sure to follow the exact like editing style and everything to match up the editing, match up the original editing. That is another lie that gets spread, is that George made the special editions just to, like, screw over Marsha Lucas. No, that's not true. She's still considered the editor even on that version. Anyways. Well, that was weird. Anyways. So Marsha Lucas, another thing that she edited was the Tosche Station scenes. Now, if you don't know what the Tosche Station scenes are, that's because you haven't seen the deleted scenes for Star Wars. George ultimately decided to cut the Tosche Station scenes. Marsha Lucas didn't like that. She said, you need these scenes. These scenes are what introduce everybody to Luke. And George is like, I think we need to follow. We don't need to follow Luke at the beginning. We need to follow the droids. Like, I recorded these scenes so we kind of have them just in case, but ultimately, I don't think these scenes work. I think they slow down the movie. We should meet Luke when the droids meet Luke. And Marsha disagreed. Now, interestingly enough, Marcia has, in recent years, actually said the exact opposite. I think that's just kind of her memory that's not totally matching up, because she still is usually pretty quick to like praise George, which is saying something, because they did not have a good divorce. It was not a good situation for either of them with the divorce. I'm not taking sides there. They're both very talented people. I think they ultimately are happier separately than they were together. I don't know for sure. That's what it seems like to me. But I will say though, I don't think she's saying anything. I don't think she's purposely lying. I think she just kind of misremembers some things, because there is actual like written evidence of the fact that Marcia did not want to lose the Toshi Station scenes. I'm kind of going on and on about these scenes. No, I'm sorry. This is this podcast. That's just what we do. My point with all this is that he still had final say over the editors. And yet, so no, the editors did not come in and save the movie from George's vision. Ivan Kershner did not come in and save the movie from George's vision when it came to Empire Strikes Back. Because he said, this is George's movie. This is George's vision. I'm just doing what I can to help facilitate that while giving it a little bit of my own stuff. And he did a phenomenal job with it. Again, everybody here has been doing a phenomenal job. But there's also stuff like the fact that John Williams, like Star Wars movies would not be what they are without John Williams' score. And yes, he came up with the score completely on his own. But it was George Lucas who was insistent that that the movies needed a score, like a classical score, because the studio was pushing for a contemporary score. They wanted like Jefferson Starship in Star Wars. They wanted like pop music. Like they wanted the Beatles. I don't know. Okay, not the Beatles. That was 10 years earlier. But point is, they wanted contemporary music, contemporary pop music. Inside, they wanted disco, I guess, is what I'm saying, in Star Wars. And George is like, no, that is not what this movie is. That's not what this needs. It needs a good classical score. So he hired John Williams on advice from Steven Spielberg. And John Williams gave us such a phenomenal score for all 9 movies. Yes, even though I have my own issues with the sequels, we'll get there. John Williams is still always a highlight. So my point is that all of these decisions, even when like they're like collaborative, or somebody comes up with an idea, like Ben Burt coming up with like the sound of the lightsabers and stuff, or ILM coming up with a lot of the like ship designs and stuff. Like with all of this, it still comes back to George Lucas's vision and George Lucas choosing the right people and collaborating with them. But still, ultimately, end of the day, George Lucas's vision. It is his art. And it just so happens that this art is incredibly popular with a lot of people. And that's when the prequels come in. Because, well, I say the prequels kind of starts with Return of the Jedi. A lot of people disliked the fact that Return of the Jedi was such a happy ending. They didn't like the Ewoks at the time. They didn't like the fact that nobody important died, or among the good guys, I mean. They thought it was too happy, too sanguine, or too saccharine. They thought it was too nice. Oh, this is a terrible podcast. But they thought it was too sweet. It wasn't realistic. And it's not supposed to be realistic. It's a space fairy tale. And that was George's point. This is the happy ending. Everybody lives that, well, not everybody, but among the heroes, everybody lives. If you love these characters going in, The heroes specifically, again, not the bad guys. If you love the heroes going in, he wants you to go out feeling happy, feeling like this was a victory. This was, again, just ultimate victory, ultimate happiness going in and out. Like, episode 5 had like a very, very dark low point. And now we are not just like as high as we were with episode 4, we're even higher. Everybody lives, everybody is safe, everybody wins among the heroes. Good has triumphed over evil completely. Even to the point where we don't have to worry about our favorite characters dying. And yes, of course, not everybody in the battle actually lived. Like, we see people dying in Return of the Jedi, but there are people that were introduced in the movie and we have no idea what their names are. Well, I actually know some of their names, but that's because I'm a nerd. The point is that for the regular moviegoer or whatever, like, watching the movies, episode 6 was supposed to be this ultimate triumph. Finally, ultimate victory over it. Which ties in perfectly to the prequels. Which, again, people have issues with. Oh, boy, did people have issues with it. Episode 1, people were complaining that there was no clear focus on a singular hero. Even though there's not supposed to be a singular main character in episode 1. That was kind of the point, guys. Like, you don't have to like it, but don't have to act like it's a negative thing no matter what. It's like, and that's the kind of thing. Like, some people, it's a design where some people are just not going to like it, and some people take that personally. But people didn't like Jar Jar. A lot of people complained about Jar Jar's comedy not being funny. Being too childish. And part of the idea of it being too childish was kind of on purpose from George. And again, this is going to get to a conclusion I will get to in a little bit, but George kind of knew what he was doing. He purposely chose things, even knowing that people weren't going to like it that much. There was a lot of people were complaining about the acting and the writing and pretty much everything that had nothing to do with the music, because nobody's going to complain about the music. You find me one person who complains about Star Wars music, I will point you to, I will show you a liar, because that is, you don't exist. But yeah, a lot of people were complaining about episode 1, The Phantom Menace, when it came out. And when I say complaining, I don't mean in a, well, I didn't really like that, here's my issues with it, like, nice, kind, respectful thing. No, there were death threats. There were accusations of, like, racism and crap. There was nearly driving multiple people to suicide. Thankfully, they didn't. But it was horrible. It was horrible how people were treating, like, the actors and stuff like that, and treating George Lucas. And why? Because you didn't like the movie? Like, again, I'm a huge Star Wars fan, and I don't like everything in episode 1. No, I think there were mistakes that were made. I would have done things a little bit different with the prequels in general, honestly. But, like, I still love the prequels. I still love the movies. I love George's vision for what this series, or what the story is. But other people didn't. And like, normally, like, if I wrote a story that you didn't like, you would just be like, oh, okay, I didn't like that story. You wouldn't, like, make it your life's mission to crap on that story and, like, ruin my life. And yet there's a lot of people that essentially made that their mission. And it's because they don't treat Star Wars like storytelling art. They treat it like it's just a blockbuster. Just something that was made for them to like. And if they don't like it, then it's bad, it's wrong. We gotta find these other reasons why it's so wrong. And again, there is actual things that you can criticize it for. And George took some of that criticism in mind when he worked on the next movies. He limited Jar Jar Binks' roles in the next movies. He kind of like refocused a little bit on some certain on like specific characters as opposed to like having it be a little bit more like generalized, like larger group. What am I saying? Generalized larger group, as opposed to having like a larger group of characters. He did keep it a little bit more focused with the two sequels to Episode 1. He basically did. He refined some things. He took in some of the criticism that was like fair and but the thing is that he didn't let that dictate the story he wanted to tell. He wasn't going to change his story just because Star Wars fans didn't like it. You can see in interviews too where he's like, before Episode 1 even comes out, he's like, yeah, people aren't going to like this. Fans aren't going to like this. Like, a lot of fans are not going to like this. He didn't know how much they weren't going to like it because he thought that they were going to act like people. But he's like, yeah, they're not going to like this one. I think they'll like the second one more, and they're going to really like the third one. But it's just the story he wanted to tell. The story he wanted to tell just wasn't going to be what a lot of people really were expecting and wanting for Star Wars. But of course, by the time you get to the Clone Wars side of things, and especially near the end of the Clone Wars, yes, a lot of the older fans are going to like it because it's going to be a little bit closer to what they were hoping for. And yet, a lot of people don't respect that. I don't know. It's confusing to me, and I want to make something clear. I should have said this at the front. If you don't like the prequels, if you don't like George Lucas's style or whatever like that, that's fine. You don't need to. He's not a perfect guy. I don't even there's again a lot of elements a lot of choices he made that I disagree with. That's totally fine, fair. What I'm talking about are these people that are just awful, like sending death threats, like wishing death on people, and just not respecting the fact that this was a story this man wanted to tell. I think that's something that I think is really what I'm getting to here. This man had a story he wanted to tell, and he told it. And whether you like that story or not, I think that's great. I think if you have a story you want to tell, you should be allowed to tell it. And most people, I think, would agree. I've written a book before. I'm hoping hopefully he'll finish the other ones. Haven't really gotten much feedback because I don't think anybody's actually read it. But the couple people I have read it or whatever, like my dad, he's like, I don't really like a couple of the decisions you made there, and I'm like, I understand, I respect that. This is the story I want to tell, and he's like, that's great. I want you to tell the story you want to tell, even if somebody doesn't like it. It's important to tell that story. However, when it comes to a blockbuster movie, suddenly it doesn't matter anymore to some people. I don't want to just say well, you're entitled if you don't like the movie. That's not what I mean. But if you're making it your life's mission to ruin people's lives because you didn't like this movie, you are being entitled. And if you think that George Lucas should not have told his story just because it wasn't the story you wanted to see in Star Wars, I think that is entitled. I think that is entitlement. And I'm not saying that you didn't like it, whatever. Again, it's fine not to like stuff. It's when you're being, frankly, a dick. Okay? I'm not, I don't swear on this podcast. I don't even know if dick is really considered a swear word, but frankly, you are a dick. If you're sending death threats to people like that and stuff, you are. So what am I getting to with all that, right? My point is this. Star Wars Episodes 1 through 6 was George Lucas's vision. And yes, when he made episode 4, he did not know how everything was going to go. But by episode 5, when he was working on episode 5, he knew broad strokes what he wanted this story to ultimately be. He's the one that, when he was making episode 5, is when he chose that A New Hope was going to officially be episode 4. Like, if he wanted to, he could have put episode 4 as episode 1. Like, nobody would care. Like, at the time, nobody would care. He could have done that. He didn't. He specifically said this is episode 4. And he specifically wanted episode 1 to be more childish. And why is that? Honestly, it's because in his mind, it's clear to me, at least, and from his, interviews and stuff, George Lucas's Star Wars is episode 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. It's not episode 4, 5, 6, 1, 2, 3. It's not 4, 5, 2, 3, 6. It's episode 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. He's numbered that for a reason. That's how, in his mind, the story is supposed to be seen. And in my opinion, that is the best way to watch Star Wars. And I'm not saying that, like, okay, look, if you want to watch episode 4, 5, and 6, then 1, 2, 3, go ahead. Knock yourselves out. I'm not saying you guys are wrong. I want to make that clear. However, I want to just say, like, that is George Lucas's vision, is to have Star Wars be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. Because it is a story of Anakin Skywalker as a young boy, finding out he has his powers, having great fear of loss, having some of that loss, giving in a little bit to that darkness, but still going forward, and then being completely succumbed by the darkness, giving into it fully, and becoming Darth Vader, only to lose everything he was trying to save, because that's what evil will do to you. And then in episode 4, it's his son, Luke Skywalker, learning he has this power, but showing that he has a fear of things that he has fear of loss. He doesn't want to lose things. And then in episode 5 is he gets stronger and he moves forward, but he loses something, and he's almost, he's tempted. He comes down a little bit with that darkness. He gives in a bit to the darkness, and you see those parallels between Anakin and Luke. And so that way, when you get to episode 6 and you see Luke on the precipice of doing the exact same thing that his father did, of completely giving into that darkness, instead, Luke learns from his father's mistakes, learns from everything that happened, and says, no, I will not give into the darkness. I am standing with the light. Even if it kills me, even if you destroy me over it, I will not give into evil. In that act of honest and goodness helps lead Anakin Skywalker back to the light side, to ultimately fulfill his destiny and destroy evil. That is the story of Star Wars that George Lucas wanted to tell. And that's why I like to watch it from 1 through 6. That's why I think I think everybody should at least one time watch it like that, think of it like that. And everybody likes to joke about that, like, behind the scenes thing where George Lucas goes, oh, it's like poetry, it rhymes. It's a bit of a funny thing, but it is true. And it is purposeful. Star Wars is kind of like symmetrical poetry, where, like, it's purposely designed where, like, you see something that happened in, the prequels that then are essentially repeated in the original. And it's like, oh, things are kind of the same, like, but they're a little bit different. It's on purpose, even down to the titles. Episode 1, The Phantom Menace. The Phantom Menace, if you aren't aware, is talking about the Sith. The Sith are in hiding. They're in the they're the Phantom Menace. Again, they're the menace. They're in the darkness. They're hidden away in plain sight. And then Attack of the Clones is, you know, even though we know what will ultimately will happen with the clones, you know, is the Republic essentially fighting back against the powers of the Sith, or so they think, but that's a little bit more complex there. But then Revenge of the Sith. The Sith fully come back. We can actually they're fully named again now, and they're getting their revenge. And then you get A New Hope. What is the New Hope? It is, of course, Luke and Leia, the Jedi in hiding, coming back forward a little bit. They're the New Hope. And then the Empire strikes back. The bad guys are striking back against the Jedi. But then, Return of the Jedi. The Jedi are back and they have returned. Not getting revenge. They have returned. And they can once again be named in public. Again, it's like poetry. It rhymes. The two trilogies are perfectly designed like that. And again, they're not perfect. Like, again, there's elements of the prequels and the original trilogies. Like, none of the movies are perfect. A lot of them I personally would have done differently, but they're not my movies. They are George Lucas's. They're George's stories. And I think that deserves more respect than they get. And then that leads us, of course, to 10 years ago. 10 years ago to, not tomorrow, jeez Louise, 10 years ago next week, on the 15th, well, technically it was before. Point is, 10 years ago this year was when The Force Awakens came out. And the sequel trilogy does not continue any of these things. Now, here's the thing. George Lucas had an idea for the sequel trilogy. He had an outline. He had a script written, in fact, or being written, when he sold everything to Disney. Now, here's the thing. It's clear that George had no intention of actually making a sequel trilogy. What happened ultimately was Disney showed interest in buying it. George wanted to make sure that everybody that... Because, again, remember, this wasn't a public company. This is a company he owned. And without Star Wars projects, a lot of them could lose their jobs or they wouldn't be able to keep working. He wanted to make sure everybody could keep working. So he was willing to sell it. But he also wanted to keep his legacy secure, all that good stuff. So he commissioned a sequel trilogy, came up with the ideas for it and everything, with the intent that then Disney would ultimately buy Star Wars and make the trilogy themselves. So that, again, he would have like the idea of like, okay, this is my ideas for it, but you guys can own it and make it. Remember when I talked about how Jaws was, the first Jaws movie was super popular, and then the corporation that owns Jaws is Universal. And Universal was like, well, we need to make a sequel, and the sequel needs to be exactly like the original movie because that's what the people want. We don't want to take any chances here. We want to make sure we give people exactly what they want. That's what you do with a blockbuster. Well, Disney, as soon as they bought Star Wars, they threw out all of George Lucas's ideas. Okay, not necessarily all. And also not necessarily right away. It seems that they only got thrown out specifically when J.J. Abrams was brought on to direct The Force Awakens. Well, at that time, just Episode 7. Suddenly, J.J. Abrams, a well-documented Star Wars fan that really did not like the prequels and was very good friends with people who were even more openly and viciously anti-prequels. In fact, I think one of his friends was actually somebody who was like sent a death threat to George Lucas at one point. I don't want to make any accusations. I'm just saying from what I've heard and some stuff that I do know. But yeah, suddenly he's being put in charge of the sequel trilogy, or specifically the first part of the sequel trilogy. And his first thing seems to have been to throw out what George's plans were for the sequel trilogy. And instead, he wanted to then, well, okay, I say he wanted to, but it seems that Disney in general wanted to just make something that was just like A New Hope. And I'm not just saying that because, like, here's the thing. I actually do like The Force Awakens. It's a fun movie. But it's a fun movie because it's essentially just A New Hope again. Just a little bit different here and there. But it's largely a very similar movie. And that was on purpose. That was by design. They will admit it. That it's not like they're hiding it. They're like, listen, we want to make something for the fans. They didn't want to make something because this was George Lucas's vision or somebody else's vision. No, this was for the fans. Get as much money as possible back as quickly as possible. And, well, I'm not going to get too much into the sequel trilogy again right now, but I think that's ultimately why, for me and a lot of other people, the sequel trilogy just does not hold up compared to the originals or even the prequels. Because even with their faults, there is a clear storytelling focus, like a clear vision that is just not there for the sequels. And that's a shame. Now, would have George's episode 7, 8, and 9 been good? I don't know. Would have got more Darth Maul. I'm always down for more Darth Maul. Would have gotten Darth Talon. Now, that's an interesting choice. I don't know what you're doing there, George. George, why do you like Twi'lek so much? That's kind of weird. Anyways, I'm getting off topic here. I just kind of wanted to talk about George Lucas and Artistry and just kind of my own thoughts on matters, because I just don't think it's fair. I really don't think it's fair how people just seem to disregard the fact that this was George Lucas's story to tell. Like, they feel like just the entitlement of some people that just don't. I don't know. Again, I'm about to just repeat everything I said in the last hour. I'm not going to do that. I just wanted to talk about this. And again, you know what? This is honestly probably the most controversial podcast episode I've ever done. Last week I was making jokes about B. Arthur. What are we doing this week? Yes, this episode probably wasn't quite as fun as some of my others. And I apologize for that. Thanks if you listened through all the way. This was an important topic for me. Sometimes I'm going to be talking about stuff that I think is important or serious. It happens. And with the 10th anniversary of The Force Awakens coming up, this just was on my mind a little bit more. So, speaking of which, I'm going to be watching The Force Awakens next week. That has nothing to do with this podcast. I'm just actually kind of excited. Because I do like The Force Awakens. It's fun. I don't really want to watch the sequels after that, but Alright, I'm now getting into mean territory. I said I wasn't gonna. I want to be positive. And I am positive. I am positive about Star Wars and George Lucas's vision. Anyways. Thanks for listening, guys. I really do appreciate it. I actually, you know what? Before I go, I do want to say I am planning on doing doing some streaming on my YouTube channel for this. As of right now, this podcast is only going up on YouTube because I can't figure out the RSS crap. So hey, this month I will be streaming a little bit of some Star Wars games. I think I'm going to be doing the podcast, the Star Wars Racer game. I don't know for sure. That's my current plan. We'll see what happens though. I might change my mind. But hey, as a little Christmas present, keep an eye on the lookout for that. Once again, thank you guys. Hopefully you'll catch me next time, and may the force be with you.